I never imagined I'd be sitting in a courtroom on a cold Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, watching my marriage of 12 years dissolve like sugar in rain. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across the mahogany benches, and the smell of old leather and legal documents filled my nostrils. My hands trembled as I clutched the divorce papers, the black ink seeming to blur through my tears. "Mrs. Bennet," my lawyer, Patricia Williams, whispered beside me, "are you ready for this?" I nodded, though every fiber of my being screamed that I wasn't. Across the aisle, I could see Michael, my soon-to-be ex-husband, sitting rigidly next to his attorney. His dark hair was perfectly combed, his navy suit pressed to perfection, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Even after all we'd been through, I still knew his body language better than anyone. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of accusations, sleepless nights, and bitter arguments that echoed through our suburban home. What started as small disagreements about money and career priorities had escalated into something I never thought possible. The Michael I fell in love with at Northwestern University seemed like a stranger now. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Morrison," the bailiff announced. As we stood, I caught Michael's eye for just a moment. There was something there, a flicker of the man I married, the one who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and laugh at my terrible jokes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Judge Morrison, a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes, took her seat. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, and I could see why. Her presence commanded the room immediately. "Please be seated," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "We're here today for the divorce proceedings of Bennett v. Bennett. Case number 2024, DR 8847. My heart pounded, so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. This was really happening. After months of mediation attempts and counseling sessions that led nowhere, we were here. The place where marriages come to die. "Mrs. Bennet," Judge Morrison's voice cut through my thoughts, "I've reviewed your petition. You're seeking dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences, with requests for spousal support and division of marital assets. Is this correct?" I stood on shaky legs. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Bennet, you filed a counterpetition contesting the spousal support but agreeing to the division of assets. Is this accurate?" Michael stood, his voice steady and professional. "Yes, Your Honor. That's correct." As we both sat down, I couldn't help but think about how we'd gotten here. It wasn't one big betrayal or dramatic event. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, missed dinners because of work, arguments about starting a family that never got resolved, the gradual erosion of intimacy and connection. We'd become roommates, sharing a mortgage, instead of partners, sharing a life. Judge Morrison shuffled through the papers before her. "I see here that you've both attended court-mandated mediation sessions with Dr. Rebecca Torres. The report indicates that reconciliation efforts were unsuccessful. However, Dr. Torres has noted some concerning patterns in your communication that she believes warrant further discussion." I felt Patricia tense beside me. This wasn't part of what we'd prepared for. Mediation was supposed to be confidential, used only to help us divide our assets fairly. "Dr. Torres has submitted a supplemental report," Judge Morrison continued, suggesting that many of your conflicts stem from external pressures and unresolved grief. "Mrs. Bennet, you lost your mother to cancer 8 months ago. Is that correct?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice was barely a whisper. "And Mr. Bennet, your financial consulting firm was acquired by a larger corporation around the same time, resulting in significant job stress and uncertainty about your career future?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Judge Morrison set down the papers and looked directly at both of us. "In my 23 years on this bench, I've seen countless couples who believe divorce is their only option. But I've also learned to recognize when two people are making permanent decisions based on temporary circumstances." The courtroom fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, the subtle hum of the air conditioning, the scratch of the court reporter's fingers across her machine. "Before we proceed with the dissolution of your marriage," Judge Morrison said, her voice softer now but still carrying authority, "I want both of you to carefully consider what you're about to lose. Not just the financial assets or the house on Maple Street, but the life you built together." I felt tears threatening again. The house on Maple Street, where we'd painted the nursery that never got used, where we'd hosted countless dinner parties with friends, where we dreamed of growing old together. Mrs. Bennet, the judge addressed me directly. What was the moment you knew you wanted to marry Mr. Bennet? The question caught me completely off guard. I looked at Patricia, who seemed as surprised as I was, then glanced across at Michael. His face had gone pale. Your Honor, I'm not sure how that's relevant to these proceedings. Humor me, Judge Morrison said with a slight smile. I think it might be more relevant than you realize. I took a deep breath, my mind racing back 13 years to a snowy night in Chicago. We were walking back from dinner at this little Italian place near campus. It was snowing so hard we could barely see, and Michael, he stopped right in the middle of the sidewalk and started catching snowflakes on his tongue like a little kid. I thought he was crazy, but then he grabbed my hands and we just stood there in the snow, laughing. And I realized that this was the person I wanted to be silly with for the rest of my life. When I finished speaking, I realized I was crying. Not the bitter tears of anger and frustration that had become so familiar, but something softer. The grief for what we used to be. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Mr. Bennet, same question. Michael was quiet for so long I wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Lisa had been working on this presentation for weeks. She was so nervous about it, staying up all night, practicing in front of the mirror. The morning of the presentation, she called me in a panic because she'd spilled coffee all over her suit. She was crying, saying she was going to fail, that her boss would think she was incompetent. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I drove across town to bring her my spare shirt. It was way too big for her, but she rolled up the sleeves and went in there anyway. Later, she told me she'd gotten the promotion. But what I remember most is how she looked at me when I handed her that shirt. Like I was her hero for something so simple. I knew then that I wanted to be her hero for little things and big things for the rest of our lives. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at Michael, remembering that day, remembering how grateful I'd felt to have someone who would drop everything just to help me. When had we stopped being that for each other? Judge Morrison leaned forward. Now I want you both to think about this next question very carefully, because your answer will determine how we proceed today. My heart was racing again, but for different reasons now. Beside me, I could feel Patricia's confusion, and across the aisle, Michael's lawyer looked equally bewildered. The judge's eyes moved between us, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of all her years of experience with broken families and shattered dreams. Given everything you've shared, everything you've been through, and everything you once meant to each other. Judge Morrison's pause seemed to stretch on forever. The entire courtroom held its breath. The bailiff, the court reporter, even the handful of law students observing from the backbenches. But for me, in that moment, it felt like only 3 people existed in the world: the judge, Michael, and me. Do you still want this divorce? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full weight of what she was asking hit me. This wasn't just a legal formality anymore. This was real. This was the moment where we either walked away from each other forever, or what? Patricia immediately stood up. Your Honor, with all due respect, my client has been very clear about her intentions. We've filed all the necessary paperwork, completed mediation, and— Sit down, counselor, Judge Morrison said firmly but not unkindly. I'm not asking you. I'm asking your client. The judge's eyes locked with mine. Mrs. Bennet, this is your marriage, your life, your decision. Not your lawyers, not your friends, not your families. Yours. So I'll ask again, do you still want this divorce? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. 6 months ago, the answer would have been an immediate, resounding yes. Michael had become a stranger, working 16-hour days, coming home exhausted and irritable. We'd stopped talking, stopped laughing, stopped touching. We'd become 2 people sharing a space, nothing more. But now, after hearing him talk about that day with the shirt, after remembering the snow and his ridiculous laugh, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I started, then stopped. I could feel Michael's eyes on me, could sense his tension across the aisle. Your Honor, could I have a moment? Take all the time you need, Judge Morrison said gently. I closed my eyes and tried to think clearly. When had everything gone so wrong? When did we stop being us? It was after Mom died. That was when everything started falling apart. I'd been so consumed with grief, with handling her affairs, with the crushing weight of losing the woman who'd been my best friend and biggest supporter. And Michael, he tried to be there for me, but his company was in chaos with the acquisition. He was terrified of losing his job, of not being able to provide for us, especially when we'd been trying to start a family. We'd both been drowning, and instead of reaching for each other, we'd pulled away. We'd let pride and hurt and exhaustion build walls between us. Mrs. Bennet. Judge Morrison's voice was patient but expectant. I opened my eyes and looked across at Michael. Really looked at him. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, and I could see the slight tremor in them that always appeared when he was nervous. His left foot was tapping against the floor, another nervous habit I'd learned to recognize over the years. This was affecting him just as much as it was affecting me. "Your Honor," I said slowly, "I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought we'd tried everything, that we were just incompatible. But listening to Michael just now, remembering who we used to be," I paused, my voice catching. "I don't think we've really tried. Not really. We've been so busy being angry and hurt that we forgot how to be us." Michael's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Richard Holloway, immediately objected. "Your Honor, my client has been very clear about his position. He wants this divorce finalized today. They've been separated for 4 months, and—" "Mr. Holloway," Judge Morrison interrupted, "did your client tell you he wanted this divorce? Or did he tell you he wanted to contest the spousal support?" The distinction was subtle but important. Michael's lawyer looked uncomfortable. He indicated that he wanted to proceed with the divorce proceedings as filed by Mrs. Bennet. "That's not the same thing," the judge observed. "Mr. Bennet, I'd like to hear from you directly. Not what you think you should say, not what your lawyer advised you to say. What do you want?" Michael was quiet for a long time. I watched as he ran his hand through his hair again, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I want my wife back." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. Patricia grabbed my arm, probably trying to keep me grounded, but I felt like I was floating somewhere outside of my body. "I want the woman who used to leave me little notes in my lunch," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "I want the person who would wake me up at midnight because she had an idea for redecorating the living room. I want the woman who cried when we planted that maple tree in the backyard because she said it would grow old with us." I was crying openly now, not caring that we were in a public courtroom, not caring that there were strangers watching our most private moments unfold. "But I don't know how to get her back." Michael's voice broke. "I don't know how to fix what we broke. I've been working so much because I thought if I could just provide for us, if I could be successful enough, stable enough, then everything else would fall into place. But you needed me to grieve with you when your mom died, and I failed you. You needed me to be present, and I gave you my paycheck instead." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "And Mrs. Bennet, what do you want?" I looked at Michael, seeing him clearly for the first time in months. "I want my husband back. I want the man who drove across town just to bring me a shirt. I want the person who understood that sometimes I needed to cry about my mom without trying to fix it or make it better. I took a shaky breath. I want us to remember how to fight for each other instead of fighting with each other." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the law students in the back had stopped taking notes. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying both of us. "In that case, I'm going to make an unusual ruling. I'm postponing these proceedings for 60 days. Both lawyers started to protest simultaneously, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm ordering both of you to participate in intensive marriage counseling with Dr. Anthony Richardson. Dr. Richardson specializes in couples who are on the brink of divorce but still have a foundation of love beneath their problems. You will attend sessions twice a week for the next 2 months." She looked directly at both of us. "If, after 60 days of genuine effort, and I mean genuine effort, not just showing up, you still want this divorce, I will grant it immediately, no questions asked. But I will not dissolve a marriage where 2 people still love each other but have simply forgotten how to show it." Patricia leaned over to whisper urgently in my ear, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Your Honor, what if we try and it doesn't work? What if we're just delaying the inevitable?" Judge Morrison's expression softened. "Mrs. Bennet, in my experience, regret over trying is far easier to live with than regret over not trying. You'll always wonder, what if, unless you give yourselves a chance. She turned to Michael. Mr. Bennett, are you willing to participate in this process? And I want to be clear, this isn't about winning or losing. This is about two people deciding whether they want to rebuild something together or walk away with peace. Michael looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I'm willing to try. I felt something loosening in my chest, something that had been tight and hard for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Terrifying, fragile hope. Yes, I whispered. I want to try too. Judge Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. Then this court is adjourned until March 15th. Dr. Richardson's office will contact both of you by tomorrow with appointment times. And please remember, this is your marriage. No one can save it but you. Dr. Anthony Richardson's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile, clinical environment I'd imagined, his space felt like a cozy living room. Warm earth tones, soft lighting, and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle rather than the traditional couch and therapist setup. Books lined the walls, and I noticed several titles about grief, communication, and relationships that made me feel both hopeful and terrified. It had been 3 days since the courtroom, and Michael and I hadn't spoken beyond the logistics of scheduling this appointment. We'd been living separately for 4 months. I was staying with my sister Rachel in Lincoln Park while Michael remained in our house, and the awkwardness of suddenly being thrust back into each other's lives was overwhelming. "Good morning," Dr. Richardson said as we settled into our chairs. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a manner that immediately put me at ease. "I want to start by acknowledging how difficult this must be for both of you. It takes courage to be here." Michael was sitting 2 chairs away from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn since college, but far enough that we weren't accidentally touching. The distance felt symbolic of everything wrong between us. "Judge Morrison's notes indicate that you've been married for 12 years, separated for 4 months, and that the initial problems began around the time of some significant life stressors. Lisa, you lost your mother 8 months ago, and Michael, your job situation became uncertain around the same time. Is that accurate?" We both nodded. It was strange hearing our problems summarized so clinically, but also oddly relieving. Like maybe we weren't uniquely broken after all. "I want to be very clear about something," Dr. Richardson continued. "I'm not here to save your marriage. That's not my job. My job is to help you both communicate honestly and figure out whether you want to save it yourselves. Some couples discover they're better apart. Others realize they just forgot how to be together. Both outcomes are valid. The first session was mostly history-taking. Dr. Richardson asked about how we met, what attracted us to each other, when we knew we wanted to get married. It was painful but necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. "Tell me about the last time you laughed together," he asked toward the end of the session. Michael and I looked at each other, then away. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I can't remember," I finally admitted. "Neither can I," Michael said quietly. Dr. Richardson nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "That's going to be your homework for this week. I want you to do one thing together, not a deep conversation, not an attempt to fix everything, just one simple, enjoyable activity. Go to a movie, take a walk, grab coffee. Something you used to enjoy doing together." As we left the office, Michael and I stood awkwardly in the parking lot. The March air was crisp, and I pulled my coat tighter around me. "So," he said, jingling his keys nervously. "Coffee." It was such a simple question, but it felt loaded with years of history and hurt. "Okay," I said, "but not the place near our house. Too many memories." "There's that new cafe on State Street," he suggested. "Grind coffee." Rachel mentioned it when I saw her at the grocery store last week. The fact that he'd been talking to my sister surprised me, but I didn't comment on it. We decided to meet there the next afternoon. Grind coffee turned out to be perfect, busy enough that we wouldn't feel obligated to fill every silence, but quiet enough that we could actually talk. Michael ordered his usual black coffee with 1 sugar, and I got my complicated oat milk latte with an extra shot. The fact that he remembered my order after all these months felt significant. "How's work?" I asked, falling back on safe territory. Better, actually. The acquisition turned out to be a good thing. My new boss, Janet, is really supportive. She's been encouraging me to take actual lunch breaks and use my vacation time. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. I think I was so scared of losing my job that I forgot what I was working for in the first place. What were you working for? He looked at me directly for the first time since we'd sat down. Us. Our future. The kids we talked about having. But somewhere along the way, working for our future became more important than actually living our present. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months. I've been thinking about that too. About how I shut you out after Mom died. You tried to help, but I was so angry at the world that I took it out on you instead. You weren't angry at me, though. You were grieving. But I blamed you for not grieving the way I was. I expected you to read my mind, to know exactly what I needed without me having to ask for it. That wasn't fair. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the people outside hurry past in the late afternoon bustle. It felt strange to be having a normal conversation after months of either fighting or not talking at all. Do you remember, Michael said suddenly, that weekend we drove up to Wisconsin just because you wanted to see the fall colors? I smiled, the memory coming back clearly. We got completely lost because you refused to use GPS, and we ended up at that tiny diner in the middle of nowhere. And the waitress told us we looked like newlyweds. We'd been married for 8 years, but we still felt like newlyweds. The memory hung between us, bittersweet and beautiful. When had we stopped feeling like newlyweds? When had we stopped seeing each other as partners in adventure and started seeing each other as obstacles to overcome? I miss that, I said softly. I miss us. Me too. We finished our coffee and parted ways with a tentative plan to meet again before our next therapy session. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The second session with Dr. Richardson was more challenging. He asked us to talk about our biggest disappointments in the marriage, and the conversation quickly became heated. She completely shut me out, Michael said, his voice rising. 4 months after her mother died, it was like I didn't exist. I tried to help with the funeral arrangements, with her mom's house, with everything, but nothing I did was right. Because you were trying to fix everything instead of just being with me. I shot back. I didn't need you to solve my grief. I needed you to sit with me while I cried. I needed you to understand that some things can't be fixed. How was I supposed to know that? You never told me what you needed. You just got angry when I tried to help. Dr. Richardson held up his hand. Stop. Both of you, take a breath. We did, the silence tense and charged. Lisa, when you said Michael was trying to fix everything, can you give me a specific example? I thought for a moment. The day after the funeral, I was sitting in Mom's kitchen, just sitting. I wasn't doing anything, just trying to feel her presence in that space one more time. Michael came in and immediately started talking about estate lawyers and selling the house and all these practical things that needed to be done. I knew he was trying to help, but in that moment, I needed to grieve, not make decisions. And Michael, what was going through your mind in that moment? I felt helpless, he admitted. Lisa was in so much pain, and I couldn't make it better. But I could handle the logistics. I could take care of the practical stuff, so she didn't have to worry about it. I thought I was being supportive. Dr. Richardson nodded. You were both trying to show love in the ways that made sense to you. Lisa, you needed emotional presence. Michael, you offered practical support. Neither approach was wrong, but they didn't match up. He leaned forward slightly. Here's what I want you both to understand. Grief isn't a problem to be solved. It's an experience to be witnessed. And Michael, when someone is grieving, the most loving thing you can do is simply be present with their pain, even when it's uncomfortable. But how was I supposed to know that? Michael asked, and I could hear the genuine confusion in his voice. You could have asked, I said, but without the anger this time. You could have said, what do you need from me right now? I was afraid you'd say you needed me to bring your mom back, he said quietly. I was afraid you'd need something I couldn't give you. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in my chest. Oh, Michael, I never needed you to bring her back. I just needed you to miss her with me. For the first time in months, we were really seeing each other again. 8 weeks later, we were back in Judge Morrison's courtroom. But this time, everything was different. Michael and I arrived together, having driven from our final session with Dr. Richardson. The same morning light filtered through the tall windows, the same smell of leather and legal documents filled the air, but I felt like a completely different person than the woman who had sat here 2 months ago. The therapy had been brutal at times. We'd had sessions where we'd screamed at each other, where one or both of us had walked out, where we'd seemed further apart than when we'd started. But we'd also had breakthroughs that felt like small miracles. We'd learned that Michael's workaholic tendencies weren't about not caring about me, they were about his deep fear of not being enough, a fear that stemmed from his childhood with a father who'd lost job after job and taken his failures out on his family. We discovered that my need for emotional presence wasn't about being needy, it was about feeling secure enough to be vulnerable, something I'd learned from watching my parents' strong marriage. Most importantly, we'd remembered how to talk to each other instead of at each other. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Morrison," the bailiff announced. As we stood, Michael reached over and took my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it said everything about how far we'd come. Judge Morrison took her seat and looked at both of us with what I could swear was a knowing smile. "Please be seated. We're here for the continuation of Bennett versus Bennett. I trust you both completed the court-ordered counseling with Dr. Richardson." "Yes, Your Honor," we said in unison. "Dr. Richardson has submitted his final report to the court. However, before I share his recommendations, I'd like to hear from both of you directly. Mrs. Bennett, how would you characterize these past 2 months?" I stood, my hand still clasped in Michael's. "Your Honor, they've been the hardest and most important 2 months of my life. We've had to face some very painful truths about ourselves and our marriage. But we've also rediscovered why we fell in love in the first place." "And what did you rediscover?" "That we're both good people who love each other, but we've forgotten how to show it in ways the other person could understand. Michael shows love through actions, fixing things, providing, solving problems. I show love through emotional connection, talking, sharing feelings, being present. Neither way is wrong, but we'd stopped translating for each other." I paused, gathering my thoughts. We also learned that we'd both brought baggage from our families into our marriage without realizing it. Michael learned to equate love with financial security because of his father's struggles. I learned to equate love with emotional availability because of my parents' relationship. When we were stressed, we both retreated into those patterns instead of reaching for each other. Judge Morrison nodded. "Mr. Bennett, what's your perspective?" Michael stood, his voice steady but emotional. "Your Honor, I came into this process thinking marriage was supposed to be easy if you found the right person. I thought love was supposed to be enough. But Dr. Richardson helped us understand that love is just the foundation. You have to build the actual relationship through daily choices and constant communication." He squeezed my hand. "I learned that when Lisa was grieving her mother, she didn't need me to fix her pain. She needed me to witness it. And I learned that when I was stressed about work, instead of working longer hours, I should have come home and talked to my wife about my fears." "And have you been able to implement these lessons?" "We have," I said. "We've established new patterns. We have a weekly check-in where we talk about how we're feeling and what we need from each other. Michael has committed to being home for dinner at least 4 nights a week, and I've committed to being direct about my emotional needs instead of expecting him to guess. We've also started doing small things together again," Michael added. "Taking walks after dinner, cooking together on weekends, leaving each other notes. The little gestures that made us fall in love in the first place." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. "Dr. Richardson's report is quite thorough. He indicates that you've both shown significant growth and commitment to the process. He also notes that your communication patterns have improved dramatically and that you've developed practical tools for handling future conflicts." She paused, looking at both of us intently. "However, Dr. Richardson has made it clear that the decision about your marriage ultimately rests with you. So I'll ask you both the same question I asked 2 months ago. Do you still want this divorce?" The question that had paralyzed me 8 weeks ago now felt like the easiest thing in the world to answer. "No," I said without hesitation. "I want my marriage. I want to keep building a life with this man, who drives across town to bring me shirts when I'm having a crisis, who remembers exactly how I like my coffee, who's willing to sit in a therapist's office twice a week because he loves me enough to fight for us." Michael's eyes were bright with tears. No, Your Honor. I don't want a divorce. I want to go home with my wife. I want to plant another tree in our backyard and grow old with her under both of them. I want to have the family we've dreamed about and face whatever challenges come our way together. Judge Morrison smiled broadly, the kind of smile that transformed her entire face. In that case, it is the ruling of this court that the petition for divorce is dismissed. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, you are still married, and I hope you'll remember this day whenever you face difficult times in the future. The courtroom erupted in a small cheer from the law students in the back, and even our lawyers were smiling. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this." But I barely heard her. Michael had wrapped me in his arms, and we were both crying and laughing at the same time. "Can we go home?" I whispered against his ear. "We never left," he whispered back. "We just forgot for a while." As we walked out of the courthouse together, the spring sunshine warm on our faces, I thought about Judge Morrison's words about fighting for each other instead of fighting with each other. We had a long way to go. Still, marriage wasn't a problem you solved once and then forgot about. It was a daily choice, a constant recommitment, a never-ending process of growing together instead of growing apart. But for the first time in months, I was excited about that challenge instead of exhausted by it. "What do you want to do first?" Michael asked as we reached the car. "Let's go home and make lunch together," I said. "And then maybe we can start planning that family we talked about." He kissed me then, right there in the courthouse parking lot, with all the passion and promise of our wedding day, but with the deeper knowledge that comes from choosing each other again after almost losing everything. Some love stories are about finding the right person. Ours was about becoming the right people for each other. And it was just beginning.